She was a wonderful woman, and I was fortunate to have her.
Your biography so far uh, is the same as mine. Where were you? Where were you born in the Bronx?
Um, I was told by my mother I was born in the Bronx Hospital, and they tore it down shortly after. So that's really all I remember about my childhood, as far as in the Bronx in the early days. I think that my father was extremely physically abusive to me. And my brothers and my sister all say that I was the main focus of his anger and his frustration.
Um,
He was a wannabe performer in the theater and the arts. And when I was growing up, it was said that I had a tremendous voice, and he wanted me to follow that. And I didn't have that desire. It wasn't. I went into the arts. I wanted to become a graphic artist, and that's kind of where the pro printwear came along. We were the official merchandiser for USA Fencing for 10 years, and we donated on average about $100,000 a year to U.S. Fencing itself. That's not including all the other activities that we did.
Now, a very important question I ask everybody. I'm fascinated with it. There were eight people in your family. How many bathrooms?
There were, well, actually, it would be one and a half. There was one full bath with a tub and a shower, and then a half with just a toilet downstairs.
Well, you guys were doing very well. Um,
Yes, yeah, and we learned that the great outdoors had a real purpose as
oh,
well.
sure. Now, as a kid, did you have aspirations? Like, were you thinking about when I grow up?
No, I really my my aspiration was to make sure I survived to the next day. Make sure that I was going to be there. Um, I had a father who at one point kicked me down a flight of stairs. So you're talking about some extreme physicality. I didn't know if I was going to be there the next day. My bedroom was a converted garage. And people go, well, you had air conditioning, you had heat. I'm like, no. There was a piece of 3/8 sheetrock on a wall with no insulation that separated the part of the garage from my room. There's
Yeah.
no heater in there, no air conditioner in there. I would wake up in the middle of the night with sweat on myself that had frozen, because I would like under the blanket and I would be sweating. And when I exposed myself, the water, the perspiration on my skin would freeze. So my aspirations really didn't start until later in life. I went into the United States Air Force. I signed up for 6 years. The U.S. Air Force guaranteed me cross training after 3 years. I went in as a military police officer, but the problem was I made rank so quickly was that I wanted to cross train into air traffic control. And I was going to go into air traffic control as an E5, as a supervisor, second level supervisor, having never been an air traffic controller before and supervising people who knew a lot more about the field than I did and had a lot more experience. So the Air Force actually denied my cross training. They did it in writing, and they said to me, you can leave the military. We will let you leave the military. And I had a wife and a son at the time, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? So I stayed in law enforcement, and then my mother-in-law worked as a clerical administrator in the Suffolk County Police Department. She sent us the application to the Suffolk County Police Department, and I took 2 weeks off and I memorized the book.
But I'm
Uh,
I'm I'm going to move you back again.
sure.
As you grew up, as you became a young man, entering uh, the armed forces, the military, are you talking to your father at this point, or did you become friends ever, or no?
No. My dad, when I so law enforcement is sometimes called Irish welfare, right?
I've
Because
heard that years ago.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it used to be that all the people in law enforcement were the Irish. When they came over to the country, they couldn't work another job. They weren't allowed to. They were considered to be, at many times in history, they were considered lesser than somebody who was perhaps black or Hispanic.
Heard that.
They were not the favorite child. If a Irish person married a black person, they said they were marrying up. And so I had taken the Suffolk County Police Department test and I was going to get the job. I was in the second class. I was in the Air Force and I did my terminal leave. And my father came to me and said, you really shouldn't take the police department test. It's so much beneath you. The job, rather. It's so much beneath you. And I looked at him and said, Dad, I said, this is 1985. I said, in 3 years, I'm guaranteed like $58,000. I said, that's a guarantee. I said, I've been doing this job for 6 years in the Air Force already, and I like it. I like doing it. Um, and my father I think that part of my father's difficulty in life is he never wanted any of his children to exceed him, to be better than him. Where you would sit there and say, that's the goal of each generation is to foster the next generation to be better off.
Mhm.
I think my father really had like a jealous cord in his body, and he didn't want to see anybody do better than himself. My father died a very lonely man. He died at the age of almost 93, and only one of my brothers would go and even visit him. And my brother who went to visit him, I think he did that more out of his religious sense than anything else. Not that he loved him. He realized who he was. For the last 5 years of my mother's life, my wife and I took care of her. We were the main caregivers. My brother Richard helped out as well. That's my brother Richard who went to Notre Dame and who helped out with my father. My father never really changed. He
Now,
became that man. He was that man his whole life.
you mentioned wife, so I'm fascinated with how people meet. How do you meet your wife?
So this is a really very interesting story. So we were in high school together. She was part of that cool clique, and I was not. I was a fencer, and she was a cheerleader. And the cheerleaders used to practice in the winter in the cafeteria. And we used to fence in the back room, but it had no water fountain. So we'd have to come run out and go to the water fountain. And when we came out, we could hear the female cheerleaders snickering at us. Hee hee, fencers, hee hee, fencers.
Yeah.
No, nobody liked this. As far as that goes, nobody really thought fencing was cool or anything like that. So then you fast forward to when I'm in college, I have friends of mine and they're driving around and they say, oh, we're going to go visit our girlfriends. And I'm like, yeah, drop me off at all. Drop me off. I don't want to go. No, we got to go. We got to go. And so they wouldn't drop me off and they took me to the house. The two girls lived next to each other. They were best friends and consider themselves sisters now. And that's how I met my future wife. Was she was dating one of the guys I knew at the time. That relationship didn't last, and we subsequently started dating. And that's how I met my wife. She used to make fun of me.
But now she was not one of the cheerleaders.
Yes, she was.
Oh, she was.
Yes,
Okay.
she was.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
we
Now,
laugh about that. That they used to make fun of us. You know, a lot of the athletes I knew from high school. One of them, he went on to play football in college in the Div 1 school. His son was going through Newfield High School, and he told his son, if you want to play football, you have to fence. And his son said, why? And he said, everyone I've ever known from that fencing team, they went on to really lead a successful and productive life. He says, and I think it has something to do with the sport. He said, so he made his son fence. And, Michael is now coaching and teaching at Station High School. Great guy. A lot of the other athletes I knew, they said to me, the fencing team was amazing. He says, in Sunny Ridge High School, you were the only team that ever consistently won. He says, and you guys didn't get enough credit. So I think today that since the fencers get into the sport so much younger, I was 12. Now today they're getting into the sport 5, 6, 7. And I think it's, the stigma of it not being cool is long gone because the coverage on television, on YouTube, they see it and they marvel at the athleticism.
now, back to the military. You advanced very quickly, and yet you said you had dyslexia. How do those two things happen at the same time?
Desire, right? So it's like the old thing, right? If you have perseverance, if you're willing to keep going, if you're willing to work at it, and the advent of computer technology really aided me greatly. Long before there was, like the spell check or the Grammarly's in life, there was a program out and it taught you passive and aggressive writing skills. And it was easy for me to practice and understand and struggle through it. I made in the Suffolk County Police Department, I made detective in 7.5 years. The mean average was close to 20 years. And so I was, 12 and a half or 12 years ahead of the average person that made detective. I went to work in the military. I went to work in the police department and I worked. I worked hard.
How were your years in Germany?
Challenging because we had no money and the German economy was incredibly expensive. We had to, when I first went into the military, wasn't entitled to base housing. And we were stationed in Spangdahlem at Spangdahlem Air Force Base in Germany. And we had to live on the German economy. So we had to pay the rent